Now, movies are judged on their success based on two factors: the critical reception from the audience and the financial results from the box office. And Star Wars films have been the centre of debate over the critical success since the first film came out. Everyone has a different opinion on which film is best, which trilogy is best, and which of the movies has quite literally ruined their lives. But one thing that you cannot debate is the financial success of the franchise. Every movie has been a profit for Lucasfilm, some more than others, but what is often overlooked is the issue of inflation on these box office results. And this has led me to ask a question about which of all of the Star Wars films is actually the most successful at the box office. Now, I think it's important to denote here that I'm not going to be looking at profit margins compared to budgets, though we will take that into account. I want to look at the overall gross box office figures. Now, looking at the table of box office results, you might be tempted to say, well, that's a very simple answer. The Force Awakens grossed over $2 billion worldwide in 2015 when it was released, and even to this day, it is the fifth largest grossing film in the history of cinema. But what happens when we adjust for inflation? $1 in 1977 is not worth the same as $1 in 2024. Now, you might again be tempted to say, well, that's easy, that's going to be The Phantom Menace because it grossed over $1 billion in 1999, and that was a long time ago. But the actual results might surprise you. So, with that in mind, let's take a look and see which film is the most financially successful at the box office. Now, bottom of the list, but by no means a financial failure, is the Clone Wars movie released in 2008. Now, it is important to keep in mind that the budget of this film was by far the lowest of any movie at just $8.5 million. And upon its release, it grossed over $68 million worldwide. If you adjust that for inflation today, that comes to $97 million. By no means terrible, but as you may see, it is the smallest grossing film of all of the Star Wars films. Now, up next, it's going to be a painful one for those who have been rooting for a sequel to Solo, but bottom of the list of the mainstream Star Wars films is Solo. This film had the smallest profit margin given its initial budget of $275 million. In 2018, it grossed just under $400 million, and if you adjust for inflation today, that is just $477 million. Still profitable, but by no means a huge success. Now, arguably the most critically weak film of the franchise, Attack of the Clones released in 2002 to a worldwide box office of $656 million against a budget of $115 million. It is most definitely a box office success, and inflation today adjusts its total income as $1.1 billion. Now, another controversial film, the final one of the saga and the last film released as of today, with a huge budget of $416 million. It grossed just over $1 billion in 2019. Now, inflation does lend it a hand in adjusting that figure to just under $1.3 billion, but again, not as big a profit margin as some of the other films on this list. Now, the final prequel film, and arguably the best of those three, Revenge of the Sith, had a budget of $113 million and released in 2005 with a gross of $848 million, a very healthy profit margin for any film, and in 2024, that figure equals to over $1.3 billion. Now, the first standalone movie, which ranks fairly high on this list, it released in 2016 with a budget of over $200 million. It was definitely a hit at the box office, raking in over $1 billion at the time. Adjusted to today's rates, that would equate to $1.33 billion, just shading Revenge of the Sith in terms of gross income, but being slightly less profitable given its larger budget. Now, my personal favourite Star Wars film, and the final one of the original trilogy, it was also the least successful of those three films. Way back in 1983, it grossed $482 million on a budget of $32 million. Today, that would equate to just under $1.5 billion. Still a lot of money. Now, another film that sparks a lot of critical debate, and it was most definitely a success at the box office. On a budget of $300 million, it went on to make $1.3 billion in 2017, and after adjusting for the total of 2024, that brings it to $1.65 billion. Now, the beginning of a new era. Back in 1999, the hype for this film was off the chart, and it certainly showed as it debuted second only to Titanic in the worldwide box office charts. Relative to its $115 million budget, it was obscenely successful, grossing over $1 billion at the time, and that figure, when you take into account inflation, almost doubles to just under $1.9 billion in today's money. Now we're into the top three most successful films, and perhaps this is the most critically acclaimed film in the franchise. The Empire Strikes Back was also an undoubted financial success. Back in 1980, it grossed just over $500 million, and that figure today comes out to a massive $2 billion, and on a budget of just $30 million, that's a huge profit. And coming in at number 2, the year is 2015. The hype is off the charts for a new era of Star Wars. The beginning of the sequel trilogy. Everyone would want to see this film. It's the first Star Wars film for almost a decade, and it had a budget of over $300 million, but would go on to gross over $2 billion worldwide, even in the short space of time that is 2015 ago. That adjusts today to $2.6 billion, making it the second biggest grossing Star Wars film of all time. And so we come to the most financially successful film, the largest grossing film, even including inflation, A New Hope. It's the very beginning, 1977, and the world had no idea what was about to hit them. On a relatively large budget for a sci-fi film back then at $11 million, it was by far and away the most successful film of that decade. In fact, it doubled Fox's stock price and grossed over $775 million worldwide. When we adjust this figure for today, over 46 years later, it equals an absolutely mind-numbing $3.9 billion. Truly an insane amount of money for a film of any era. And so here we have the list in full. The most successful Star Wars box offices adjusted for inflation. Now, it seems unlikely that we're ever going to hit these numbers again, given the financial climate and the fact that these films at the very top of the list were true phenomenons. We will not see their likes again. At least, it's difficult to imagine us seeing the likes again. Now, of course, this list is simply just looking at the film's gross figures adjusted for today's inflation. It's not taking into account their budget, their profit margins. We're not even adjusting the budgets for inflation per se, but it does give you a good idea as to how successful each film is compared to today's money. And I think there are some surprises in there. Certainly, A New Hope and The Force Awakens would certainly be up at the top of most people's lists when you ask what did best at the box office. But there's a few surprises in there. I think Rogue One being as high as it is a bit of a surprise. I think even when you look at something like The Clone Wars, given its relatively low budget, it is quite a profitable film. And so this is why I think Star Wars has a lot more fuel in the tank. Every single film, regardless as to its critical reception, has been a massive success. It's always made money, even when you take into account inflation. And that's why I think we are in it for the long run with Star Wars. No matter who owns the franchise, Disney, Lucasfilm, it doesn't matter. There is money to be made from Star Wars. People will always go and watch Star Wars because people love it. And I can't blame them. Star Wars is fun. And looking at these films, there's only 12, 13 of them. There's a lot more to come. I'm excited for it. So, thank you all for watching. I do hope you've enjoyed this video. And if you haven't, please do consider subscribing to the channel. There's going to be a lot more videos coming up. In the meantime, thank you for watching, and I'll see you very soon.